Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are tuning in to us today to our Eurofound live webinar. Today is a very special webinar and it takes place at a very special time. Today we're joined by our colleagues in Cedefop, the other EU agency celebrating 50 years of existence in 2025. And we're delighted to be hosting this together with our colleagues in Cedefop, Eurofound and Cedefop, the first agencies to be established as part of the EU agency network. We were the first two, established back in 1975. And actually we've grown to more than 50 now as part of a network that looks at specialised areas and has remits across the European Union. So from small seeds, great mighty oaks do grow. And I think we're here to represent the fact that evidence-based policy research does serve a purpose in driving forward better quality of life and work for all Europeans. And for 50 years, Eurofound and Cedefop have done that. We have served the EU policymakers and national policymakers with evidence-based data analysis, research findings to help drive forward the kind of progress we need to improve the lives and work for Europeans across the 27 now member states. And it is an interesting fact that 50 years ago when we were established, we did just that. And 50 years later, we're still doing that. And in fact, you might argue that the role that we have to provide that kind of evidence-based, impartial knowledge, analysis, data, and on occasion advice is important still as part of today's scenario, where things have moved so fast, where disinformation and misinformation is so much on the agenda, and where new technologies are driving the pace of progress and our economies. These new technologies have had a profound impact across all areas of our lives and indeed our working lives. They have the potential to increase our productivity, to reduce risks, to make our jobs perhaps easier, to improve job quality. But of course, we also know that they bring their own challenges. And artificial intelligence, which is the topic that we have on the agenda today, how is AI changing the world of work in Europe? The artificial intelligence is at the forefront of this change. It has huge, tremendous potential for success and for growth, for increasing our competitiveness and progressing the European Union and indeed the world. But we know that there are also concerns about job destruction, about changes in tasks, about the way we work, about work intensity. And we know that we need to close the gap between how much workers know about this and how much we need to introduce AI into our world of work. There are also, of course, business implications, which are quite significant. We can see that AI is driven by huge investment. Can small and medium-sized enterprises, which are really at the very core of the European business model, can they survive in an arena where AI is so dependent on this kind of investment? And of course, today's webinar is also taking place at a very pertinent moment. We're not the only people to be discussing AI, clearly not. It's on the agenda very much in the US. We heard even today, the Vice President is talking about what Europe should do about its regulation in this area. And we also know that in Paris, President Macron has been having a lot of fun talking about how you can use AI, and you might look up that video, which is online. But we also know that it's not all fun and it has a slightly darker side. And with the Maria Draghi report, the Letter report, and indeed the Digital AI Action Act, we do know that there are positive motivations at a European level to ensure that we integrate this into the world that we currently live in. But how can we do that? How can we do that in a way that increases Europe's competitiveness and makes us competitive with the other global economies across the world? These are the huge levels of challenge that we face. They're the considerations and concerns that we want to discuss today. And for that, both Eurofound and Cedefop have done work. In fact, I know that Cedefop, way back in the 80s, was already looking at AI in its first iteration. So we have a lot to bring to the table here today in terms of our expertise, and the discussion will be broad. And for that, I'm utterly delighted to have with us our colleague from Cedefop, Jasper Van Loo, who is in fact the Cedefop Department Coordinator responsible for this area. And for Eurofound, Dragoș Adăscăliței, who's a research officer working here in the employment unit. So thank you both for joining us today, and I'm looking forward to our discussion. But I would remind our audience, and we have many of you online today, we're over 600, 700 people who have signed up for this webinar this afternoon, and we look forward to you joining in the discussion and the chat. So please don't hesitate. Follow us on social media, and of course be active in your chat on social media, but also I am here to receive your questions and to integrate them into our discussion as we move forward for the next hour or so. So without further ado, I'd like to now move towards our questions here and talk to our two expert colleagues who are with us on the floor. And I think by starting today's discussion, we do have a sort of a tendency to talk about AI in the abstract slightly. And I'm not sure that everybody is always on the same page in what we actually mean by artificial intelligence. So perhaps we can start today's webinar by really just removing the chatter around robots and tools and applications. And can we really talk about what is it that we understand is artificial intelligence? Dragoș, would you kick us off?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Mary. And I think this is a very important question, because when we talk about AI, we're not talking about a single technology. In fact, when we're talking about AI, we're talking about an array of technologies that are embedded in different processes. We're talking about systems that are embedded in production processes. We're talking about AI systems that are embedded in service delivery, but we're also talking about artificial intelligence that is used to evaluate workers. So there's a huge and a diverse array of technologies that are currently deployed in European workplaces that come under the umbrella of AI. Now, when we talk about the artificial intelligence, I think a very simple way of thinking about these systems is that they have much more autonomy than traditional computer systems, that they have the capacity to learn from a data set. So they are capable of predictive functions. They are also capable of evaluating processes, and they are also able to function without a direct human input. That is, they have a much higher degree of autonomy than traditional computer systems. So I think that's the important part, or one of the key defining characteristics of AI systems. On the other hand, they have the capacity to learn, right? So unlike traditional systems, AI systems have a autonomy and have the capacity, are actually designed to actually learn from vast amounts of data, to make recommendations, to make decisions, to inform processes, and to inform decisions at the workplace level.
I know, Jasper, I know that at Cedefop you've actually looked at different types of AI. I mean, would you like to kind of give us an idea of what they are to set the scene?
Yeah, just to complement what Dragoș said, I think it's very important to distinguish right from the start that AI is something fundamentally different from simple automation. Simple automation is about doing the same task over and over again, and you do that following a set of predefined rules. So that's basically programming. AI is something completely different. Now, if you ask experts, and we've also been looking at this, there are different stages of AI, and some experts say there's 3, some say there's 4, some say there's 5. Just going into the more detailed one, the 5-stage AI development. So basically, it starts relatively simple. What is called Internet AI is basically collecting and analyzing user data from the internet to provide recommendations and personalization. For instance, think about Netflix or Amazon. Then there's business AI, which is process optimization at businesses, where sales, inventory, feedback data are analyzed to predict consumer behavior and to optimize customer service. That's one level higher. The third stage of AI is where it goes to perception AI, which means perceiving the world using sensors, cameras, and other hardware. So an example of this is the Face ID you have in your smartphone protection, and also the AI that's in cars that sees pedestrians and that sees traffic signals. Okay, so that's perception AI. Autonomous AI is basically currently is one of the most physical, most advanced AI, which is machines that act more or less independently in the physical world, that combine data and different technologies to perform actions. Think, for instance, about Tesla's self-driving cars. And then finally, we're not there yet, but this is basically where some of the things that we see around us are definitely going, which is artificial general intelligence, or AGI, which is a future wave of AI, where AI can think, learn, and adapt like a human, solving a broad range of problems across various domains, without being explicitly programmed for those tasks.
And perhaps the latter is the one that gives the most fear to people at the moment. Exactly. But I mean, if we're looking at what you've made very clear there, Jasper, is that, you know, it's really a lot more diverse than perhaps people understand to begin with when we talk about AI in a generic form. But when we talk about it in terms of the way it's applying to Europe, what are the main types of AI that workers in Europe are experiencing, and have they actually been there for some time?
If I can start, Mary, I think there's 5 types of AIs. Basically, some people say it's the developments before 2015 and the developments after 2015, and that cutoff point is often taken because since 2015 we've had so much development in data, in increased processing power, also in terms of deep learning, which means learning machines that are learning without explicit instructions from humans, and that learn also from unlabeled data. Like, I'm getting a little bit technical. Whereas before 2015, the things were relatively easier, and the AI was sometimes called more narrow AI. Now, if you talk about different application areas of AI, we see that basically across the board, depending on sector and the size of organizations, AI has a role to play. Think, for instance, quite, of course, to be expected, IT processes, which is very, very common. But we also see it in customer service workflows, chatbots. We see it in HR and talent management. We see it, of course, in sales and marketing, in operations, in finance, in supply chains. Basically, across the board, there's applications for AI. That doesn't mean that it's everywhere already implemented yet.
And do we worry about a particular type of AI being the cause of the most job destruction, Dragoș?
Well, I think the important thing to say is that when we look at the job destruction, the research usually has conflated research on artificial intelligence with research on robots. So most of the evidence that we have at the moment on the impact of artificial intelligence and more generally or more broadly digitalization looks at the impact of AI plus the impact of robots, and basically tries to see whether this type of technologies have led to job destruction indeed. Now, the most recent research that we see, both from Europe and from outside of Europe, particularly from the United States, shows that digitalization, robotization, and artificial intelligence has not actually led on aggregate to job destruction. In fact, companies that are using digital technologies and AI have actually created or were more likely to generate employment and create jobs. So that's one of the, let's say, key differences that comes from more recent research in comparison to very early research, let's say in the beginning of the 2000s, that was expecting quite massive job destruction coming on European labor markets and around the world because of the deployment of digital technologies back then, but also because of the deployment of artificial intelligence. Now, if we look specifically at more recent versions of artificial intelligence, particularly at generative AI and large language models, we can see that actually there is some job destructions in particular parts of the labor market, especially if you look at job postings that try to advertise positions for translators, for example. We can see that in the aftermath of the deployment or the release of generative AI technologies, the number of job postings have decreased. So this is to say that while on aggregate we do not see job destruction because of artificial intelligence, we might see actually, in particular, job transformations in many of the roles, because people are increasingly using artificial intelligence for different tasks. So AI used to augment jobs, but also some job destruction in specific tasks that or specific roles that are more likely or more in danger to be automated by artificial intelligence.
So in fact, I mean, overall, we're not seeing the kind of widespread job loss as a result of the introduction of AI that might have been feared, or indeed was the narrative for some period. Is that correct?
That is correct, and more than that, I think we're not going to see massive job losses because of artificial intelligence. One, because we are currently in an environment where labor markets are very tight, so there is a need of workers. The companies are facing labor shortages. So I think companies, when deploying AI systems, are not deploying this kind of systems with the purpose of firing workers, but with the purpose of actually improving the quality of service delivery, improving the quality of products, and with the purpose of improving productivity. And on the other hand, we know that let's say this kind of environment is likely actually to remain like this for the upcoming future. So because of issues related to digital transition, because of issues related with demographic aging and so on. So I think what we are going to face is, in the future, a lack of workers, future increased deployment of artificial intelligence, but not with the purpose of actually displacing workers, but actually with the purpose of increasing productivity and increasing competitiveness.
That's interesting, because if we talk about it then from the perspective of more job transformation than job destruction. I mean, Jasper, you do a lot of work on skills and the need to sort of upgrade and adapt our skills in terms of being available for the new labor market. I mean, what kind of changes are we seeing in the jobs that will be needed in the future to adjust to this change?
Yeah, Mary, what we see actually is that, I mean, of course, we look at all these estimates and, you know, the recent research that shows that this initial panic that we had around 2015, that half of the jobs could be at risk, this time is really over. But now, quite recently at Cedefop, we've asked workers themselves how they see it. And if you ask adult workers, you know, themselves, what they see AI do, it's only 1 in 5 workers that believes that AI can do more than half of their work tasks. So there are some workers who think that, okay, the job could be taken over by AI, but definitely it's a minority. Now, for many more workers, AI kind of represents a task transformation. 30% of workers say, because of AI, I no longer do some tasks. 41% says, I do now new or different tasks. And I think also very important is that 2 in 3 workers say that AI allows them to do some tasks faster. So basically the idea is a skills transformation rather than a job destruction trend.
But that, I suppose, is an interesting kind of, you know, pivot around which I'd like to focus a little bit, is that in some ways, we assume that the introduction of this AI, robots, etc., will allow us to do some jobs better, quicker, if you like, that it removes some of the more mundane tasks associated with them. But then on the other hand, we see quite a lot of feedback from workers about increased intensity of work. Is is there an implication that by introducing these changes, there's an assumption that we will do things more, better, quicker all the time, which actually is having that kind of job quality impact, which could be perceived as negative? Or am I not seeing things clearly? Dragoș, I asked you to follow up on that, and then I'll Dragoș, yeah.
Oh, sorry, if I may step in on this one. So research in general says that digitalization in the past 20 years has actually contributed to a certain extent to increasing work intensity, right? Because we're doing things differently, we're required to do things faster, we're doing different things, we have shorter deadlines, and so on and so forth. So there is a danger indeed that artificial intelligence, and in particular, not only artificial intelligence, but artificial intelligence compared or complemented by or embedded in algorithmic management systems, can actually lead to an intensification of work. However, this very much depends on how companies themselves are choosing to actually deploy artificial intelligence. Because of course, the technology by itself does not lead to work intensity. It matters very much how companies are using such systems, how they are deploying them in relation to consulting workers, to consulting worker representatives, and whether these systems are monitored in order to make sure that the potential gains that they bring in terms of faster work processes, increased productivity, increased service quality, are actually complemented by measures that protect the job quality of workers.
Yeah, so there's a balance there, an equilibrium that we need to find between ensuring working time regulation and approaches which allows us to deal with the intensity, which may not actually be as a result of the introduction of AI. Jasper, did you want to follow up on that a little?
Yeah, I mean, there's also evidence that says that that AI also, if it's implemented in human-centered ways, let's say, this is often how we call it, it can also become kind of an equalizer between workers, that have more high productivity and that have lower productivity. So AI can also be a technology that kind of helps bridge the gap between most productive and least productive workers. I think it all depends on, you have to look at the different impacts, and that in itself is often not as easy as it might seem. And then also, of course, oversight, combining AI in a context of human-centered HR practices, training practices, it makes all the difference whether the negative or the positive effects can dominate.
Okay, well, let's zoom out a little bit then from that and just go back to where are we seeing this AI integration most? What kind of industries are we seeing it playing out in? Is it being deployed in different ways in different sectors and industries? Are we seeing that emerging already? Would you like to say a word on that, Dragoș?
Yeah, I must say that, of course, as with everything in Europe, there's a large variation into how AI is deployed across countries, across regions, across industries. If I may say, first of all, there is a large variation in terms of country differences, cross-national differences. Nordic and continental countries tend to deploy, AI tends to be much more prevalent in Nordic and continental countries, and it's much more, it's rarer in Southern and Central and Eastern European countries. So on average, for example, in a country like Denmark, almost a third or more than a third of companies are deploying artificial intelligence systems. By comparison, in countries like Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, the use of artificial intelligence in companies is much, much, much lower. Yeah, so we're talking about less than 10% of the companies using such systems. That also links to how AI varies by industry, right? So we know from European statistics that artificial intelligence and robotic technologies tend to be used mainly in the manufacturing sector. So much of the artificial intelligence and advanced robotic systems tend to be deployed in the manufacturing sector. But that is not to say that other industries do not use such technologies. I'm thinking, for example, in healthcare, artificial intelligence has some research shows, for example, that some applications have actually performing better than humans in detecting, for example, diseases. But we're also talking about the deployment of artificial intelligence in retail sector, in the finance sector, in ICT, and so on and so forth. So as Jasper was mentioning in the beginning of the conversation, because AI is such a general purpose technology, its potential to be deployed across different industries and is immense. But one thing I want to point out is that, of course, the fact that AI can be deployed doesn't mean that AI is going to be deployed. And I think this is one important point that is worth mentioning, because even if we look at differences between industries, differences between countries, or even differences between company size, because that's an important factor when we talk about AI, there is a, let's say, we can see that there are really, these differences are really large. And one thing I would like to point out as well is that AI currently in Europe is mainly deployed in large companies. Yeah, so companies that employ 250 workers or more. In fact, recent research coming from Eurostat shows that in 2024, around 40% of large enterprises in Europe were using artificial intelligence, in comparison with less than 10% of small enterprises. That is a very important aspect when we talk about the deployment of AI, because a lot of the employment in the European Union is concentrated actually in small and medium-sized enterprises. So if we're talking about the impacts of AI, the potential impacts of AI on productivity and competitiveness, we are bound to actually reflect on how to actually expand the use of AI in small and medium-sized enterprises.
Oh, Dragoș, you raise an awful lot of issues there, which are very interesting. I mean, maybe I'd just like to pick up there, though, on the potential for a two-tier speed when it comes to AI and investment in AI. And we know that the United States, and indeed others, but China also, but recently has launched a monstrous investment in AI infrastructure across the country. Are we at risk at European level of seeing some countries move forward on this? And as you say, then a two-tier approach when it comes to the economy, because we have SMEs, which are the powerhouse of Europe today, but in fact are maybe slightly removed from this because they can't afford the investment, as we talked in the morning. So I know that the summit in Paris today is discussing these things, but have you thoughts about how Europe could adapt to this or respond?
Well, I think there's a lot we can do, and there's a lot that Europe is currently doing on this matter. So I would just say, that when we look at the news and that really describe the lack of investment, so to speak, in Europe around artificial intelligence, I think they are telling only half of the story. Because there are quite a lot of instruments at the European level that are aiming at, or that aim at funding, first of all, research around artificial intelligence, development of new artificial intelligence models and systems, but also trying to invest or incentivize companies to invest in artificial intelligence. And I'm speaking here about the Horizon 2020 project, which has lines of funding that link to artificial intelligence. I'm speaking about the cohesion policy, which basically tries to invest in infrastructure at the regional level and digitalization at the regional level. I'm talking about the Repower EU instrument, which dedicates around 134 billion euro in artificial intelligence. We know that the Repower EU is actually requires member states to dedicate at least 20% of the money that they have through this funding line to digitalization projects. But we're also talking about the more recent competitiveness compass, which amongst others focuses on or requires or plans to develop AI gigafactories, which will provide the necessary infrastructure in Europe to develop in-house or continental, if you will, artificial intelligence models that will be able to compete with the other regions in the world, namely China and the United States. And finally, I would say that we do have also quite a significant investment in artificial intelligence in particular countries. I'm thinking here about France, for example. We know that President Macron just days ago has announced a huge investment in response to what's happening in the United States. And France is also a place where quite a few companies developing artificial intelligence are located, that develop similar systems to what OpenAI and DeepSeek are doing in China and the United States.
Thanks, Dragoș. And Jasper, just you may want to follow up a little bit on that also, but a question that arose from what Dragoș talked about earlier, also about the industries and the sectors that we're finding AI most prominently. And he talked about the healthcare sector, but that reminds me as well is that there is an understanding that, you know, even though diagnostics may be improved by AI, we will still require the human dimension in many of these areas. Can you speak to that? Because I know that you've done some work also on looking to the future in this way.
Yeah, the future, we look at various sectors, and I think what is important to also point out that with AI, it is an emerging technology, so we're also really reliant on foresight, actually talking to people in the field to see what's going on. So we're working, for instance, with the automotive sector. We're working with geriatric nursing in this sector to see what role AI can play, and how it complements rather than substitutes human actions and activities. Now, maybe coming back a little bit to the geographical divides, we're also able to look at that because we asked workers. I mean, we always like in our service to listen to workers, and if you ask workers straight out, based on all kinds of activities that they do, we find that 28% of them kind of use some type of AI. And it's much higher in Western European countries than it is in Southern European countries, and also than in Poland. Now, we also asked them, and we did this last year, can you look back and go compare 12 months ago with today? And can you tell us if you do more AI or do you spend less with AI? And we see that also the divide between the faster growing countries and the lower growing countries is widening over time. Just to give you an impression, it's widening. Yeah. In Belgium, 1 in 2 workers spends more time using AI at work than a year earlier. And in Spain, it's only 1 in 4 workers that spends more time in AI compared to a year ago. So I think that clearly shows that in Europe there's countries moving at different speeds, and that also all makes the case for these mega programs where investment is promoted, incentives are given. It's very important to keep a close eye on countries that may be lagging behind, but also regions, and then also sectors. And especially pertinent, I think, is ensuring that also SMEs have the tools, have the capacities to join the AI revolution.
So what it does seem to point to is the need for a differentiated approach, both by sector, but also by country in this particular case. I'm seeing quite a few questions coming in, and we'll come to them. One of the questions, though, well, several of them actually speak to the worker in all of this. So maybe we can just drill down a little bit and go down to the more human level here. And one of the questions that I have coming in is about it's actually, I think I'd like to speak to it in terms of algorithm management, if you don't mind. and how that's being used in the world of work, because there's some questions here about how that plays out in terms of HR recruitment, selection processes, but also in terms of very many other aspects of worker productivity, for example, in terms of discrimination, in terms of favoritism at the workplace, etc. Can one of you speak to that? Maybe Dragoș, you start us off.
Yeah, I think that's an important question, and I think this is where most of the fears are located. How companies are deploying AI in managing the workforce, and what is the impact of that on working conditions, on job quality, on job prospects, and so on and so forth. So now, a word on algorithmic management, because we're talking here about artificial intelligence on one hand, which, as I said in the beginning, is an umbrella term in itself. And this is true also for algorithmic management. So algorithmic management can be actually paired with artificial intelligence, but it can work, or the systems that fall into the label of algorithmic management do not necessarily need to be paired with artificial intelligence. I think that's an important thing to mention, because unlike AI, which has, as Jasper has mentioned, really made huge inroads into being deployed in Europe since 2015 onwards, algorithmic management systems have been deployed for a much longer time. And in let's say in very simple terms, algorithmic management systems are computer procedures that are used to coordinate labor inputs in an organization, right? So this kind of softwares are not necessarily AI driven. Right, so they can be actually very simple softwares that allow, for example, managers to coordinate, let's say, how tasks are carried out in an organization. Now, what has happened in recent years is that with the, increase in platform work in Europe, the meaning of this simple way of algorithmic management, or the simple way of managing workers has changed. Because in platform work, algorithmic management is basically the only tool that allows companies to manage their workforce, right? Increasingly, we see that because of platform work, algorithmic management systems deployed in the platform economies have been actually used also in the traditional economy. And this is where the main issue are. Because if you deploy, for example, algorithmic management systems together with AI, artificial intelligence systems, oftentimes this risks being a black box. It risks being a black box both for the workers themselves, because they do not know what type of data is being used, how that data is being used to manage them, but also for managers themselves, because I think ongoing research basically shows that algorithmic management systems have a huge impact in the managerial function itself, changing it in a way that, or transforming it in terms of the types of skills that managers need to manage their workforce. So research basically shows that algorithmic management systems tend to actually lead to issues related to trustworthiness. Managers or workers do not trust these systems, tend to kind of lead to increased levels of stress amongst workers because they do not know how their data is used, and also tend to lead to fears of job loss. And I think that's very important as well.
Can I take you up, just move on from there briefly, Dragoș, because two questions that I have here, one from Per from the European Managers CEC has a question which is about this, which is, he says, managers perceive how we work differently and do not fear a massive job loss, but are deeply concerned about AI biases and the need for upskilling. How could these biases be regulated in a European context so that we can train our teams in acknowledging the impact of these AI biases? And Mansi's question also speaks to that, where it's, how does AI in HR decision-making impact bias, and do we have any evidence around this? So this is clearly a question and a concern that, you know, is growing around this topic. Jasper, would you give us a few words on that in response?
Yeah, I think a lot depends, and it's in the areas that you mentioned in HR, but we have also had examples in, for instance, getting unemployed people to a job. So job matching engines. There's a risk of discrimination if there are inequities that are in the vast amounts of data that power the system. So I think it's really crucial that those, this critical oversight, transparency, and accountability is really the basis for developing those systems, designing those systems. So, and I think the EU Act is also, one of the ways to that kind of gives those reassurances. Now, maybe a little bit more towards the gains versus the negative impacts. Yes, there's a potential of efficiency and productivity gains, but then some researchers have also managed that there's negative impacts on creativity, on improvisational capacity, and of course stress. And also there's a risk in workplaces, in teams, that there's less cohesion. So I think all in all, it suggests that you have to be quite careful in designing something that doesn't have worse consequences than any benefits that you might achieve from it.
Because this is clearly a concern coming in from the questions that I'm seeing. I mean, there's a question from Raoul, which is sort of speaks to what you were just saying now also, Jasper, about are there studies that anticipate the impact of AI in employment of vulnerable groups such as the Roma in Europe? And you've kind of made some reference to that, but I suppose that just shows the level of concern there is around how this can in some ways seep into the way we manage and that we don't see the impact it's having on a negative basis. There's a call here from maybe some ideas from the speakers as to how we could address that better.
I mean, if I can take this question, it's vastly important to think about such issues in the context of artificial intelligence and algorithmic management in the workplace. I think the AI Act gives some ideas about how this kind of systems can actually be deployed in a correct way, if there is such a way at the workplace. And I think the first thing to mention is that the Act itself puts this algorithmic management and AI systems that are used in people management in the high-risk category of artificial intelligence systems. Now, what that means is that there's a certain amount of steps that both companies that create such systems, but also companies that deploy such systems need to follow in order to be able to use them to manage workers. Two things I want to mention here. The first one is auditing of the data that is used by such systems in order to inform decisions made by managers. I think, as Jasper has said, AI systems are as good as the data it is used to train them, right? So if the data is bad or it has biases, there is a high risk that the AI system is going to replicate such biases, in which case using such a system to eliminate bias in decision making becomes almost nonsense, right? On the other hand, I think it's important also to think that the AI Act and also the platform economy, the platform, the directive for the improvement of working conditions of platform workers, both require a human in command, right? So besides the kind of measures that you take into kind of auditing the systems at the workplace, all the decisions that impact individuals or workers need to be supervised by a human, right? So, and I think this is an important thing to mention, because unlike the United States, the regulatory environment in Europe is quite different, and it's much stronger.
But I suppose, how do we manage that then, in terms of we know some of our biases, but then we have our unconscious biases? Is there a danger that we're just going to amplify and multiply this, into the future, Jasper?
There's definitely a risk, yeah, and case there's no control over the data that goes in, and you're not aware of some things that, because some of these systems are completely a black box, and you really cannot know because you cannot follow every single step of the way. Now, that's one side, but we always talk about AI and also algorithmic management having some productivity impact, these kind of things. Also that, I mean, I'd like to come back a little bit to the issue of productivity. What we see is that there's strong indications that any productivity impact is being held back because of missing skills. We see that if you ask workers, 61% of them says that they will need new knowledge and skills to deal with the impact of AI at work. So alongside, I mean, ensuring that everything works without, confirming biases, also, giving people the skills, the knowledge, the capacity to judge, how particular decisions have come out of AI systems, to understand how it works. That's a big issue.
Okay, well, the questions are coming in thick and fast, so I really want to, but I do want to just set the scene here, because to follow on from that, I wouldn't always say that I want to put women and young people in vulnerable groups, but at the same time, when we look at these, can you give us a picture there of where and who are using these AI tools? Where do we see young people and women? Are they present? What proportion are we talking? Can you just speak to that, set the scene a little bit for those two groups for us?
I could start there. I could start if you like. Again, in our work, we look at the differences between females and males. I mentioned earlier 28% of adult workers, if you look at 11 countries, use some type of AI. For females, that's 27. For males, that's 30. So males clearly in the lead, not such a big difference though. Now, if you look at age group, the differences are much higher. So the ones between 25 and 34, 38% uses AI. The ones that are older workers, aging workers between 55 and 64, 21%. So there's a huge difference, and that in itself is already an issue. But what is the bigger problem is that older and female employees and those with precarious employment contracts, they are also least likely to participate in training to build and reinforce their AI skills. So basically, it confirms what we know also from many other fields, that the people that need particular skills the most are also the ones that are less likely to take part in training. So I think that's an important issue. Now, a little bit of good news, but I mean, it's a little bit about the AI developer workforce. So the people who are developing AI solutions, the technicians, is still a very male-dominated occupation, but it's slightly less male-dominated than the traditional programmers that we've had in the, let's say, in the previous waves of technological development. So that's a little bit of good news.
A little bit of good news in the midst of all of this. Yes. Okay. Yeah. And I assume that therefore the early adopters that you're explaining there in terms of young people, that will play out in a positive way for them as they enter the labour market and they move forward. But of course, they will also need new sets of skills as things develop and evolve. I really want to get to some of these questions, though, and one which came in early on, and it really is a big question. And I don't expect us to go into huge detail on that today, but it is something which is sort of the elephant in the room. We have the twin transition, and clearly digital is one, and then climate is the other. But as we move forward on digital with AI and everything we were talking about, we also have the environmental impact, which is fairly significant, of all our data centers, etc. And there's a question here from Elizabeth, which is, can one of the speakers talk to the environmental impact, water in particular, that AI is already having, and the possible impact on quality of life for Europeans?
If I can take this one. Yeah, indeed, as you said, it's a big question. I think all the research that we're seeing at the moment points to the fact that all this new wave of artificial intelligence, including large language models, are very energy intensive, right? They are very energy intensive, and they are ultimately very bad for the environment. I think at the moment, policymakers are trying to actually find a balance between what we can do in terms of developing new artificial intelligence systems and the potential impact of having such systems on the environment. I think at the moment in Europe, the current debate tends to focus mostly actually on having such systems and developing such systems in Europe, rather than on their environmental consequences, which to me points to the difficulty of tackling these questions, because no matter how we proceed with developing artificial intelligence, the energy question is going to stay there, and whatever we're going to talk about artificial intelligence, we implicitly we're going to also reflect on how we actually deal with the environmental issue.
Okay, I've a couple of questions also about the status of the AI Act and how can that help us really move forward. A question from Evie is, would you say that the current EU regulation on AI has arrived at the right point in time, or is it outdated in relation to the developments that have already taken place? And Sophie's question is, in what ways will or won't the new Invest AI initiative help to close the development gap in AI between countries, or indeed the gap between large companies and SMEs? So again, speaking to Europe's response, our attempt to kind of move forward in this area, is it adequate? Are there gaps? You've spoken to some of these issues, but I suppose in the bigger picture, is it enough? Are there things that we're seeing emerging? Is it outdated? Jasper.
I mean, the AI Act, it's recognized internationally, globally as a good a standard, basically. So I think it's a framework where we can make further progress. But of course, there's much more to be done. That goes without saying. And also, I think we're moving in a very rapidly developing field. Now, I think one of the real issues, and maybe we're not always zooming in on it so much, is AI literacy, because skills, I mean, again, skills, you can do whatever you want, and in terms of regulation. If we talk about AI in the world of work, and people do not have the basics, which is AI literacy, I think it's going to be very difficult. So again, from our own research, 6 in 10 adult workers do not really understand, how a computer or machine learns, or how this actually works, how AI works, or is not really able to interpret, the findings of AI applications. I think this is really a core issue, and that is also why we see these consistent gaps between the training needs that we see in the labor market. 42% of workers, for instance, has a skills gap, an AI skills gap, and then if you ask them, do you get training, it's only 15% that gets training for AI. So I think we have to see, everything together, and the regulation on the one side, but then also, do we practice what we preach in terms of skills development, where also there's lots of funding available, but there's also many things that kind of slow that down, make it difficult. I mean, there's access issues, there's issues with SMEs that do not have the access to funding or to the right training. So basically the AI trends, the AIization of the economy is also, let's say, a big skills transformation, and that is a big
mindset transformation that's required at the same time. And it's funny, that's a kind of a common question from Barbara, talking about how do you encourage staff who feel that AI is for IT experts only to use it to their advantage, and that gap needs to be closed. There's no doubt about that, and that needs to pan out across all all age groups, all genders, and all sectors of society for this to really work. I want to take one, I think, probably final question before we start going here. But there's when we talk about the impact that AI will have on jobs. And Evelyn's question is an interesting one. What potential does AI have to put downward pressure on wages? Is it possible that it will eliminate certain jobs and push workers into more manual labor, which are traditionally poorly paid jobs? I mean, maybe Dragoș, you can respond on that one.
Yeah, just first to say that, when we look at the prevalence of artificial intelligence and particularly large language models, emerging survey evidence from the European Union shows that actually a majority of workers actually are actually using artificial intelligence, particularly systems like ChatGPT and the like, Copilot and the like. And this is because this kind of systems are not primarily designed for being deployed in businesses, but they are actually designed for being used in person by people, right, in personal circumstances. So that's actually quite an important thing to say, is that what we expect actually to see in the coming years is an ever increasing use of artificial intelligence, particularly large language models, by workers also, but by people in general, right? So I don't think there's much convincing to be done there. I think it's important to note that we're at the beginning of a period when we will see a large increase in the uptake of artificial intelligence, both in workplaces and in terms of personal use. Now, can you please remind me what was the question, Mary?
The question there was on the downward pressure of wages, that then it would actually mean that it would eliminate certain jobs and push workers into more manual labor, which, ultimately are poor.
Yeah. Some evidence on some results that analyze the impact of artificial intelligence on wages indeed do show that in some occupations AI can actually lead to a decline in wages, and that's a concern that policymakers have currently on their radar. So that's important to say. On the other hand, again, if we look at aggregate numbers, we can see that jobs in sectors and companies where AI is deployed and wages for these jobs have increased. So I think whenever we talk about artificial intelligence, first we need to see which artificial intelligence system we're talking about, and B, we need to think about we need to zoom into which particular jobs it is impacting. I think what we see currently in the labor market as well is also a behavioral response from workers. That is, workers who think that their jobs are going to be impacted by artificial intelligence are already shifting to occupations where the perceived potential for automation is actually lower. So I think in the upcoming years, we're increasingly going to see labor market transitions that move away, indeed, from jobs that are in danger of being automated by artificial intelligence.
Okay, we're coming to the end now of the hour. It has absolutely flown by. Thank you all to the audience for your input, and indeed to our experts who have been fascinating. I know that there are several questions I haven't got to. I know that there's one from Anna about integrating AI knowledge into lifelong learning, and which is an interesting part that we actually discussed there. It's also about changing the mindset, and also a very interesting question from Henrik about workers. To what extent is the development of AI dependent on the input of workers? And if they hold that back, can they protect their interest in this whole process? So I think serious scope for another debate on this issue. But I'd like to just close today with both Jasper and Dragoș, just really 30 seconds on what you think are the priorities for the future in terms of looking at AI on the basis of what you've heard today and your own expertise before we close out today's webinar. Jasper.
Yes, thanks, Mary. I think in 30 seconds, I would say skills is very important, but let's also not forget the context in which we implement AI. If we implement AI into outdated models and systems, it's unlikely that we'll get the productivity gains that we are looking for. So It's also about how companies think about talent, how they think about skills. I mean, are they thinking in terms of talent pools and skills, or are they still more thinking in the traditional notion of corporate departments and job descriptions? So it's also a mindset shift towards organizing talent and work that will help bring benefits of AI. And then, of course,
skills, but within a bigger context.
Yeah.
Okay. Dragoș.
Just for me to say, I think it's job quality, because I think when we talk about artificial intelligence, the potential impact on the workplaces is immense. We are going to see an increased uptake of AI in the European Union. We're already seeing it. And I think paying attention to how actually artificial intelligence impacts jobs in terms of their job quality is of immense importance.
So skills, job quality. And I think that probably represents very well and nicely the input from our two agencies looking at the same topic, but from different perspectives, looking at different domains. And in that way, we bring a holistic picture to the policymakers to help them. I would actually ask our audience and those who are interested to look at what we have online. Your Cedefop will continue its project on digitalization, AI, and the future of work. And Eurofound has ongoing research on human-robot interaction and the influence of new technologies on the workplace. We will continue that through our next work programs, and we will be providing the kind of information and analysis and data which will emanate from these projects. You can watch this actual webinar in full. It'll be available on our website in the coming days. And you can indeed look at the other ones which we have, podcasts and other webinars on the topics. There are also topic pages, both on Cedefop's website and our own, on related topics, for example, on gender equality, on job quality, on sustainable work, on training and skills, etc. Please do check them out. And if you need to contact us, we are here to provide that information for you. We will continue to collaborate closely with our colleagues in Cedefop over the coming year and indeed ongoing as we celebrate our 50 years. And we look forward to the Cedefop get-together, which will take place virtually at the end of the year, where you may see some of the same characters again. So until the next time, I would ask you as a very active and engaged audience to sign up to our social media channels, to follow us on our podcast channel, or indeed to sign up for our new and incoming webinars, which will be happening throughout the course of this year. Thank you very much for your engagement. Thank you for joining us this morning, and I wish you all a very, very good afternoon.